With all of the TTK talk and the weapon balance conversation over the last couple of weeks, I've not really covered much of the new map, Wake Island, yet. All of my gameplay from the last 4 or 5 videos has been from Wake Island, but I've not really gone into detail why I like the map so much, because I really do like it. The gameplay in the background today, you're going to notice, has no HUD on it, and that's because I wanted to show off Wake Island in all of its glory. It is one of the prettiest maps that you can play in Battlefield 5 at the moment. Now, Zotac has sponsored this video with their GeForce RTX 2080 Super AMP Extreme graphics card. So, whilst I explain a little bit more about Wake Island and I give you my thoughts, it's their card in the background that you're going to be watching 1440p ultra settings Battlefield 5 gameplay with RTX enabled. Now, RTX is the technology that's bringing real-time ray tracing to video games, and Battlefield 5 has had this technology supported since it launched last year, so we're now over a year's worth of time into the future. The technology is being refined, and now some of these RTX cards, you really can make Battlefield 5 look the best that it can and maintain a frame rate above 60 FPS, which is awesome. Ray tracing technology is being accelerated by NVIDIA RTX cards at the moment, but interestingly, and I think most of my audience out there will be console gamers, the Xbox Series X, that's the new Xbox coming out next year, and the PlayStation 5, both of those consoles will support ray tracing as well. So the technology is starting to seep through into other areas now. So then, Wake Island, you've probably been playing this map now for the best part of a week already, and right now I am playing literally nothing else. This map, alongside the other 2 Pacific maps, they really bring back that proper sandbox feeling to Battlefield 5. We've got air, land and sea combat combined onto a map that is mainly dominated by water, but the map itself is so large, it's twice the size of the original Wake Island from Battlefield 1942, that the land that sits above the water, the playable land on the map, is more than enough to support the 64-man combat that this map can have. Now, the huge lagoon of water in the middle, that is one of the main areas that you're going to see the effects of ray tracing emerging on Wake Island. You're going to see reflections here and bright flashes of light from things happening around the water. Now, I've spent quite a little bit of time moving around on dinghy boats on this map, and I'm sure most of you as well will have hopped into some vehicles every now and again. You can get from one side of the island to the other very quickly, despite the map being quite large. And that speed is especially important when you're playing the Conquest Assault mode, when you're invading as the Americans. If you can cap all of the flags on the map, then the Japanese, they've got nowhere to spawn, and the round can end extremely quickly. Now, the Higgins boats that the Americans can use to land on the island, those can be used as mobile spawn points, and we've seen that on the other maps available in the Pacific. On Pacific Storm, at least, if you park this thing on a beach and stay inside it, then more people will start hopping out of it because it remains active on the land. And you can do that here on Wake Island as well. You can funnel lots of spawning infantry back onto the map at a certain point. It's a really interesting mechanic. But overall, I do have to say, the sea combat of the air, land and sea part is somewhat lacking. The PT boats are missing from the setup here, and that means that the water around Wake Island is largely being used for transport purposes rather than actual combat. And considering the amount of water that surrounds this island, I really feel like that is a big missed opportunity. PT boats, or at least references to them, have been found in the Battlefield 5 files, but so far there's no sign of them turning up in the game. The sea combat is then left to the 2 amphibious vehicles on the US and the Japanese factions, and most of the time those tanks are up on the land, they're smashing back against infantry or other land-based tanks. Now, just because there isn't that much combat going on in the water, that doesn't stop the lagoon, making Wake Island one of the most unique maps in Battlefield 5, however. Even if you're just using the water for transport purposes, zipping across it in a dinghy boat is really, really cool, and looking right out across the island as a sniper and then picking off an enemy a few hundred meters away, that still doesn't get old. Now personally, I've been playing Breakthrough most of the last week on Wake Island. I've been jumping into servers that have Breakthrough active on them. I've been playing through the rounds and then backing out once it moves on to Conquest. And that's because I actually quite like the Breakthrough experience on Wake Island. And that's probably going to go against quite a few people here. And so let's talk about some of the issues that Wake Island has on Breakthrough. When it comes to defending, the attackers do have far too many vehicles in my opinion, and that makes it very difficult as the defenders in certain sectors. If the attackers are able to keep tanks alive from the first sector when pushing into the second, the third, and the fourth, you can be facing almost an entire team of armor, which really isn't that great. I think DICE needs to look into the spawning of those tanks and maybe limiting how many of them become available in the first sector. I get that the first sector is the first stage of the invasion onto the island, and therefore that should be backed up by lots of vehicles, but if those vehicles are then kept alive by the attackers, then perhaps the vehicles in the second and the third sectors, they shouldn't be allowed to spawn until enough have been destroyed that it would make for a balanced, fair fight. I'm not sure if that's actually possible to do, because I don't think DICE does that anywhere else in the game. Unless the vehicle is active, then of course you can't spawn into another one from its spawn point, but it would certainly change up some of the gameplay, and it would stop those scenarios where there's like 3 or 4 tanks advancing towards one sector. It just doesn't really feel great as the defenders at the moment. Then we should also talk about the setup of some of the sectors within Breakthrough here on Wake Island. There are a couple of them that only have one objective in them to capture. And that sort of makes sense when you look at how narrow Wake Island is. The hangar section in Sector 2 and the harbour section in Sector 4, those are the 2 one objective areas. And they're also the points where the way the island is populated with locations that it makes sense for only one flag to be there. The hangar is the central and only point in the second sector, and the land before the harbour, that's similar to the land before the hangar, with lots of bushes and bunkers protecting the location, so it's not really a good position to put another flag. One flag breakthrough sectors, they can create some really rather chaotic gameplay, and sometimes the normal gameplay of Breakthrough ends up getting destroyed, and it turns into something more akin to Operation Underground out in the open with just players all over the place. But for me personally, that's kind of similar to what I've come to expect from the Breakthrough game mode anyway. You're playing through the map in sectors, massively reducing the overall player space, so that already forces players closer together, and it creates more frequent chaotic moments. So if you're not a fan of one flag sectors in Breakthrough, then I'd suggest playing the map on Conquest, where you will get that much more classic battlefield feeling. But I think in a certain way that is actually a strength of Wake Island here. You can either play it on Breakthrough and you can have an absolutely chaotic 45 minutes with just people running everywhere and you focusing on certain points rather than paying attention to the entire map in one go, or you can play it the more classic way in Conquest Assault, and you can spread out that action a lot more and the pacing is a lot slower. On Breakthrough, things are kind of fast and furious. On Conquest, things are a little bit more easier to digest, and I think that is actually a benefit to Wake Island. You can play it in 2 completely different ways, depending on which game mode you want to play. Unfortunately, however, there is one thing that DICE really boo-booed here on Wake Island. They have the Americans attacking the Japanese, rather than the other way round. In the Battle of Wake Island that took place not long after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Japanese invaded the island, taking it from the Americans, and then the Japanese held on to it until the end of the war, despite the Americans then making several attempts to take it back. Perhaps here, DICE is bending the events of history a bit to make those repeated American attempts after the first capture by the Japanese. Maybe DICE is trying to turn that into a full-scale invasion, or perhaps more likely there is another reason, because there is. It's probably because DICE only modelled the battleships and the destroyers and the aircraft carriers and the invasion vehicles for the American faction. The other 2 Pacific maps, Iwo Jima and Pacific Storm, they use the Americans as the invading forces, and I'm willing to bet that because DICE doesn't have assets for the Japanese, like an aircraft carrier, all those destroyers, and landing craft, that They just chose to set up Wake Island in the reverse order than what should actually be happening. So it's disappointing for the history buffs out there for sure, but for me personally, I don't really mind all that much. I'm more interested in just playing the game, and I'm not that worried about the historical accuracy of the map and the battle that's taking place. If you took away the fact that DICE got this wrong, does it change the map all that much? In my opinion, not really. But overall then, I really like Wake Island. It's a very pretty map, there's action happening all over it, there's lots of unique locations that you can go and fight in. Breakthrough offers a brand new way to play the map. We've not seen Breakthrough on any previous renditions of the map in other games. And the fact that this is the latest rendition of the original Battlefield map going all the way back to the 1942 beta, that gets me all nostalgic as well. It's not a perfect map by any means. I don't think any map these days can be perfect in a Battlefield game with so many different players from so many different backgrounds looking for different things, but the imperfections, in my opinion, they're outweighed by the chaos, the sandbox feeling, the rock, paper, scissors gameplay, and just the outstanding beauty. A big thanks for watching today. I hope you enjoyed the gameplay in the background. A big thanks to Zotac for sponsoring the video with their RTX 2080 Super Amp Extreme graphics cards. You made the video look really cool, guys, so thanks for sending me that graphics card. If you want more details on the graphics card, I will put a link down below in the description for you. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.